Hello and welcome to Purely Academic, your potentially educational podcast for the month of September 2024. My name is Jonathan Lack. I'm a film critic, PhD candidate, and I've been watching a possibly reckless amount of horror movies lately.
And I'm Sean Chapman, high school English teacher by day, otaku by night, and I've become a relapsed practitioner of the 4 o'clock nap.
You may remember us from such podcasts as The Weekly Stuff, Weekly Suit Gundam, and Japanimation Station, and we are back to chat about movies, video games, anime, and whatever else we feel like talking about.
And who knows, we might just learn a little something along the way.
For this inaugural episode, we want to introduce ourselves to new listeners, reintroduce ourselves to all our old friends, and tell you about what we have planned for this new monthly podcast. Sean and I have been doing this a very long time. Our show, The Weekly Stuff Podcast, ran for 500 episodes from 2012 to 2024, and our anime-focused podcast, Japanimation Station, just wrapped up its truly epic 4th season earlier this week, with the 5th season set to premiere this winter.
Yeah, with Japanimation Station taking up more and more of our time, we've decided to retire our regular The Weekly Stuff podcast and instead focus on creating a new and improved monthly podcast that can inherit all the variety of that old show just with a new format and hopefully a better sense of focus. So you'll be hearing us talk about the movies and shows we've been watching, the games we've been playing, and a whole lot more. We'll, of course, always have a main topic, which we will discuss and debate, but this show will be packed with all manner of other surprises in segments, such as our ancient battle of wits and creating trivial top 10 lists.
So, Sean, I guess that means our first order of business is to give some quick introductions. We've been doing this a long time, but we've actually known each other even longer, since the 7th grade, where we basically just hung out and talked about all the kinds of things we discuss on podcasts now. We'll be doing an in-depth sort of reintroduction segment as our main topic today, but what's the basic summary of who you are and why the heck are you here?
Yeah, well, I'm an English teacher in high school. I've been a high school English teacher for about 5 years. There's technically 6 years since I got my license, but there's like a gap year when I moved to Texas. I mostly work with 9th graders in co-taught classes alongside a special education teacher where we focus on scaffolding or modifying instruction for students with a special accommodation. So that's kind of like my day job. I got into teaching English and into podcasting because I love stories in all forms. So I love books, movies, games, anime, all that kind of stuff. And so that's why I like English and English literature, and that's why I like doing our podcast. I'm also fluent in Japanese. I've had to start working on Spanish because the powers that be have decided that 2 of my classes I'm teaching this year are with English language learners who have only been in the country for 1 to 2 years. So that is a whole adventure I'm having. But I'm very excited to be launching this new podcast.
I'm excited to hear more about that. That sounds difficult. If only all those students learning English were from Japan, you'd be set.
It would be easy. No, they're almost all from various Central or South American countries, except for I've got 1 Vietnamese student and I've got 1 Chinese student. No Japanese though.
You're so close, but not quite. All right. I've been reviewing movies online and in print for over 20 years now, since I was 10 years old, and I currently run the Fade to Lack Substack at jonathanlack.com. It's a pun on my name. There is a bunch of new exclusive writing there each and every week, so you should go take a look, sign up if you want. There's cool stuff over there. I am also, as I said earlier, a PhD candidate in the Department of Cinematic Arts at the University of Iowa, where I mainly focus on Japanese film and animation, and I'm actually getting ready to defend my dissertation this fall, which is the last step before they make you a doctor. So I should be a proper doctor pretty soon, and I'm going to milk the shit out of that on this here podcast whenever we get there.
I'm excited for you to become the anime doctor. I've just been waiting for it forever.
Is that what I should? I've never really loved the name Fade to Lack. Maybe it becomes the anime doctor. I don't know. We could, I don't write a ton about anime there because we have the podcast where we talk about anime, so I don't need to. In any case, Sean, you are the one who came up with the name for this new podcast, so why don't you give us the quick version of why we landed on Purely Academic and exactly how much educational content should the listeners expect?
Yes, well, I think listeners can expect a monthly dose of intense pedagogical content focused on giving listeners an inside baseball look at education in America today. I think that's really our focus. We'll be diving deep into some really rich texts this unit with Harold Bloom and talking about his taxonomy, really going into that. Okay, no, that's not what we're doing. So it's called Purely Academic, but it's not really an education podcast, though I'm sure education stuff will come up. We'll be deep diving into all sorts of random topics and nonsense, as we have been doing on our podcast for years, just grabbing anything that really, piques our interest. The name Purely Academic was really born out of 2 things. One, it's really, really hard to come up with names for things. And two, the primary overlap I found in our Venn diagram, Jonathan, the Sean Jonathan Venn diagram, that isn't just a white dude's podcast Venn diagram, is that we are both educators. So we're going to milk everything we can out of that juicy little overlap there, that we're both in education, me in high school, you at the university level. So
just the fact that you explain that through a Venn diagram kind of proves your point.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, we've been podcasting over the majority of our lives, but as we've podcasted, our podcasts have trended more and more towards digging deeper and deeper into specific topics and trying to situate those topics in a more academic framework, not being overly stuffy about it or anything, but looking at the history, looking at the context, pulling in all those kinds of things in our different frameworks that we've developed in our lives in the world of education and elsewhere. So in that sense, I think it makes sense to call it purely academic, but we'll, of course, always be joking and messing around. And so I just couldn't think of anything that captured the weird energy we have as podcasters other than this really persistently sarcastic turn of phrase, which is purely academic.
Well, all right. I think that's good. It was, as I said, it was your idea. So if you guys love it, thanks, Sean. If you hate it, blame Sean. I think it is a good idea. I didn't necessarily come up with anything better. So it's all on you, buddy. All right. In the future episodes, our first segment here after our introduction would be sort of checking in on what games we've been playing, what movies we've been watching, it's basically show and tell is what it is, is the basic thing here. But we thought we would dive into the main topic first this time so that new listeners can get a better sense of who we are, or old listeners can learn more about us. We'll do that check-in, that show and tell segment afterwards. Later on in today's show, we'll have our first segment of something called The Monthly 10, where we're going to do some silly top 10 lists. I'll be ranking for you the best episodes from the Weekly Stuff podcast if you want to hear more from us. But without further ado, let's get into this month's topic.
Hell yeah.
All right, Sean, for our main topic this month, we're just going to shoot the shit and interview each other because we want everyone to get to know us better. We want to get to know each other a little better. That's hard to do sometimes. We've been talking for multiple hours a week for over a decade, almost 2 decades. It's a long time.
Yes, it is almost 2 decades is the right way to put it.
Yes. So in any case, we just thought we would do something kind of fun like this. Back in the Weekly Stuff podcast, when we did our 400th episode, we did a little kind of 20 questions game, and we thought we would do something sort of like that again, but also focused on kind of getting to introduce ourselves. So, Sean, I'll kick it off, and we'll just trade questions back and forth and until we feel like we're done. But I'm going to start with the first question I had on here, which is, what is your memory of how this whole podcasting thing started? Because I think I've told that story before, but I don't know if I've heard it from your perspective. And why are we still doing it?
Yeah, man. So, I mean, like you said in our whole intro segment, we met in middle school. And at that point, we just sort of like hung out at recess and stuff like that, bit by bit. And then in high school, in 9th grade, is when we started hanging out a lot more. And that's when we also were both on the debate team. So we were partners on the debate team together.
Yes.
And then over the course of that process is when we started to slowly lose our minds because debate tournaments on Saturdays are eternal. They last the entire time. You show up at the school at about 6 a.m. and you're there until like well after dark, 7, 8 p.m., sometimes even later than that. So it is a long commitment of time on the weekends. And so I really feel like a lot of it started from that, of just this sort of mania setting in. And then we did our like various different kind of video projects that we did. Some where we filmed them at the debate tournaments, some that we did for like machinima projects that we did for our English class where we worked together. Which is, now that I'm a high school teacher, I see like we put so much more effort into that shit than you're ever really like expected to as students. Like that we went so far above and beyond the Call of Duty for some of those assignments where we made like, it was like Lie versus Lay, the grammar point, and we did a Halo 3 machinima video. And so I feel like the podcast all just kind of grew out of that because you have your whole like projects that you were doing where you were reviewing movies. You had your monthly 10 list, which that was a written blog at the time, right? You did that before we did. Yeah, so it was a written blog, and then eventually you wanted to turn that into a podcast. And then the original idea was you just kind of pull in various people you knew to do episodes. And so there are some, like the most primordial episodes of our podcast. Some of them don't have me on there, which is like a very amusing thing to think about. now, like 15 years or something into this. But
those aren't online anymore. Don't go looking for them. I did a whole project of cleaning up the internet a few years ago. They're gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's when we would have been like 17 years old or so. And so, yeah, like that from my perspective is when all of that started. And so then we just sort of like did it a little like bit by bit with the monthly 10. And then that slowly evolved into the monthly stuff. I guess that would have happened around the time we were in college together at Boulder. And then we then moved in together when we were in college. And then that's turned into... should I even say the name of that website that we were loosely affiliated with for a short period of time?
I was writing movie reviews for a site called We Got This Covered. I was also an editor there. I eventually left because it's kind of a content mill, but they did ask us to move our podcast over to them, and we decided to make it weekly. It was called WGTC Radio at the time. It was honestly probably the best title for a podcast we ever had because it was actually kind of clever. But then later on, we left, but we took the podcast with us, renamed it The Weekly Stuff, fully intending to come up with a better name further down the line. That was after...
You say that. I never intended for a better name. Okay. I always like that name. That to me is like, I love The Weekly Stuff. It's a terrible name. Don't get me wrong, but I still love it. It was the most honest name for a podcast of all time, other than when it stopped being weekly.
Yeah, we did 75 episodes as WGTC Radio, and then starting in January 2014, I believe, is when it turned into The Weekly Stuff, and we did another 425 episodes, and several spin-offs. So we really flourished after we broke away from the big site.
And from, I guess from like my perspective of like how the podcast started, it really for me just feels like an extension of like conversations we had during like lunch/recess, particularly in like ninth grade, into like the weird shit we did at debate tournaments, into the school projects we did together. And then we did stuff like, like record commentaries over them and print out like DVDs or like burn DVDs of them and things like that to give to people we knew. Like it just all feels like it was a natural evolution from that point. And then like podcasts was the most like sort of reasonable place to land because this is all when we were in high school. So we're talking like the late 2000s, early 2010s when podcasts started becoming a big thing.
This is, for reference, I had an iPod. This is when iPods were a thing, and that's, to listen to podcasts, you had to download them on iTunes, and then load them onto your iPod, and take them to school with you, and listen to them while you were hanging out in gym class or something, which is what I did. I tell people that story now, and some of them are like, that's where the pod in podcast comes from, and I'm like, yes, it's kind of like reminding people that refrigerator was a brand once. And not just the thing we call the, cold box in our kitchen.
Yeah. Or that, if you end a call, you hang up the phone because you hung up an actual phone, or you dialed a number because there was a dial and you moved the dial around. Yes, it is one of those weird sort of like remnants of language that still sticks around. But yeah, that's kind of like my perspective. It was just this sort of slow evolution of us fucking around, and the most natural place for it to end up on was a podcast. And we've just been doing that for forever since then. And we are now old men.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we've outlasted several of our influences because you mentioned Machinima, and I realized a lot of people today probably don't know what that is because the company most famous for that is no longer a company, Rooster Teeth. And Rooster Teeth... Yeah, their podcasts were also influential to us early on. Bungie and Halo and their podcasts, all sorts of things like that. Is Giant Bomb even still around? I know the people who started it aren't. But...
So Giant Bomb does exist, but all the original people at the website are not there anymore. Like it seems cool. Like I don't follow Giant Bomb anymore, but there are like people who were affiliated with the site along the way are still there, but all the OG members have gone off to various corners of the internet at this point. So yeah, like most of those big things that were served as inspirations for our podcast stuff, we have outlived them in one form or another, which is a weird thing to think about. It makes me feel old.
Yep. All right. So that was my first question. What have you got, Sean?
My first question. I think this is a great question that I think you're going to give a very detailed answer to. How's it going, Jonathan?
Yeah, so I mean, you and I have not been out of contact, obviously, but we've been out of contact with the people if they were just listening to the Weekly Stuff podcast. So how's it going? I mean, I didn't even talk about this on the Weekly Stuff, but I've moved states since the last time we did a weekly stuff. You've heard Japanimation Station episodes if you listen to that show off on the side since I moved. But yeah, I am, just so you know, I said I'm at the University of Iowa. I still am enrolled as a student at the University of Iowa for one last semester. I am in Colorado now. We had, my family and I had bought a condo out there in Iowa, which is where I lived for 6 years. And I had 2 different roommates at different times who helped, who had the top floor and helped pay the rent and all that stuff. And basically, because I only had 1 semester left and not a full year, it was just smarter real estate to sell the place. And I'm here in Colorado, and I am at my mom's house, while I basically figure out the next step, because academia is weird. The big jobs for the coming school year in terms of like actual faculty positions open up in the fall of the preceding year. So I'm planning on going on the job market for that this fall. And I don't quite know where I'll end up, because it's kind of based on, it annoys me when people are like, oh, where do you want to teach? And I'm like, in academia, that depends on where jobs exist in the country.
Yes.
And so
it's not like a buffet where you just get to pick, oh, well, I would love to go to New York. I would love to, man, it would be great. I'm going to go to Vancouver right? Yeah. It's just not like, it's not that simple.
It's not that simple. So that is why I am here for the moment, because it just didn't make sense to go anywhere or sign a lease or anything. Because I technically do have some still outstanding job applications for the coming school year, which is just starting. But, adjunct stuff can be very last minute, or could be for the spring semester, not the fall, and stuff like that. So, yeah. So I'm kind of in between things. That's how it's been going. I am glad my mom and her husband did finish their basement. It was unfinished for many years. The way actually my house that my mom lives in now is the exact same floor plan as the house Sean grew up in, which was very eerie when she bought this place about 8 years ago. And I saw it for the first time, and I'm like, this is the house I used to go over to all the time when Sean and I would hang out, because it's the same like floor plan and everything.
Yeah.
And I remember, because we would always record back in the day in your unfinished basement, which was eventually finished. So they eventually finished this. So that's where I am now. So I have a little bit of privacy, which is nice. But yeah, I've just been hanging out. I've been doing a lot of work. I've been revising my dissertation, basically to get it to where I'm happy with it. So there's a lot of work there. That also includes stuff like building some of the appendix material and reference material that I have for it. Putting together images that are going to go in the dissertation. So like I've been reading it and I've been taking note of, okay, here I want to put in like either this screen cap of what I'm talking about, or more often, usually a gallery of images for more of kind of explaining the moment. So I've been putting those together. And then I've also launched these paid subscriptions over on jonathanlack.com, my Substack, where I have new weekly movie reviews. There's a series called Movie of the Week, which is just kind of all about variety. It's kind of my only rule is it can't be a super new movie, like nothing from this year or anything. I think the newest thing I've reviewed is Alien Covenant, which was the last Alien movie before Romulus. And so those are for paid subscribers. There's also reviews of new movies. Those are usually free when those come up. So I've been doing a lot of writing over there, and that's been fun, and that's supplementing my income in some way. So if you want to take a look, you can go look. It's only $5 a month. It's actually cheaper for students. I was able to add a student discount, which I was very happy about, because I believe in that, obviously. So yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm hanging in there. I'm hanging out. I'm playing some games. I'm watching some TV. I'm doing okay.
Yeah, it is kind of funny how the break with the weekly stuff like took place over a very eventful period in your life. So it's like we ended the weekly stuff, and then all this crazy shit happened.
Yeah. So, yeah, that move was fairly stressful. I was in that place for 6 months. 6 years. And then, moving across state lines, and my family was out of the state, so they had to come help. It was a whole thing. But I'm here now. Most of my stuff is in boxes. I've had to pull out some different things. I have an assortment of random anime DVDs I've had to pull out of boxes for, literally reference material for the dissertation, where I get to a point I'm like, fuck, I need to check that. And it's always in my head that the question is it faster to torrent this thing, or is it faster to go grab the DVD or Blu-ray? It's often faster to just go grab the Blu-ray. But yeah, I've got Lucky Star sitting here because I had to look up the Gotoza Sama scene.
Yes.
For something. That'll make sense to listeners of Japanimation Station. Yeah, so my life is kind of in different boxes and pieces, but I'm good.
Yeah, I like my experience of your move was the like manic text messages I got in the midst of us doing Japanimation Station, where you're like, okay, well if we record this and this and that and this and we can do that and we can watch this thing, I'm like, okay, calm down, like calm down.
Yes.
Let's not try to watch like 50 episodes before you move and do all these podcasts. Let's just take this bit by bit. This is like I could tell you were very very stressed because you usually wouldn't send a text message like that. I'm like, okay, let's slow down here a little bit. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, once I got moved and I was here, it has been calmer. The worst thing about moving is thinking about moving because it eats up your whole fucking life.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that, like, you just want the day to hit and for it to be done. And it's like
Yes.
that, like, the long build up to this thing you know you're going to have to do, and there's only so much you can prepare for it. Yeah, those are always the worst.
And there's so many weird little inconveniences as you, like, literally put stuff in boxes and then you just have to... But there has to be a period when everything's in boxes, but you're still not moved. And then it's
Yes.
like, what do I do with myself? So anyway, but I made it work. We're good. My brother Thomas helped a lot with all of that. And my dog Phoebe has been very good. She's here. My mom and her husband have 2 dogs, so they've all been hanging out. Their dogs are younger, so Phoebe is a little more just wants to hang out with me because the puppies, they can exhaust her. So
I know that feeling.
well, okay, that leads into my next question, Sean. I want you to describe a typical day in the life of a 9th grade Texas public school English teacher.
Oh, Jesus. What even is a typical day? Yeah. So,
Maybe that's the answer. Maybe there is no typical day. I don't know.
yeah, I guess, like, just to give some context, because we're at the very beginning of a new school year when we're recording this. So I've had a week and a half with the batch of students this year. And so I guess, like, the one way to cut off that question is that there is no day in the life in the sense of, like, each year is very, very different. Because it all depends on the group of students you have. My group of students this year so far are really good. I feel like COVID had such a huge impact in each subsequent school year after. You just saw very different effects on that group of kids. And I feel like we're getting to the point where the heart of the pandemic was long enough ago that most of the students I am seeing have started to fully readjust to what it is to be a student before they get to me, right? Because now it has happened for them in like mid to late elementary school. And so they've had a good chunk of schooling without the disruption of the pandemic. So now it's not, the behavioral issues have not been as big of a thing this year compared to the last 2 years, though it's also super early in the school year. So that they're always more well-behaved at the beginning than they are once you get a bit in and they get sort of comfortable and they start to sort of stress the boundaries a little bit and see what can they get away with. That's always where you
once
get
they become the raptors testing the fences from Jurassic Park.
Exactly, yeah. They're very, like, sort of timid and skittish early on, and then once they get comfortable, they start to, kind of try to make it their territory and all that kind of stuff. And yes, it's a whole thing. But so far, the behavior stuff has been really good with my students. As I said in my intro, I do co-taught classes. I've kind of always done that to some extent. When I taught for 2 years in Colorado, I had a couple of co-taught sections. Co-teach meaning I work with a special education teacher. I've got a smaller number of total students in the class because there's a higher proportion of them need special accommodations of various varieties. And so those are kinds of the classes I have somehow ended up with. Like, there's just each year I've gotten bigger and bigger loads of that to the point where this year I have only co-taught classes, or I got 2 sections of these newcomers who are new to this, new to the country. I was going to say new to the state, not the state, the country. And they do not really speak English. So I have another teacher in there, though they're not a special education specialist. They are there to work with the students in their native language, well, in Spanish, and then we are doing our best with our Vietnamese and Chinese student. Luckily, we've got translation with phones and stuff like that you can use, so that has not been as big of a deal. But yeah, that has this year, my sort of like day in the life has been very sort of hectic because it's been a lot of sort of figuring out how do I teach these classes. This year has felt a lot like my first year in some ways, of where, because there's only me and one other teacher dealing with the newcomers in English, you don't have a sort of group of other teachers that you can collaborate with to make lessons and plans and units. The state does not put as much emphasis on what they give you when you're teaching these types of classes as opposed to the regular English class, because you serve a smaller proportion of students. So there's just a lot less overall support you get from colleagues in the state, which makes sense, but it also is, these classes are harder to teach. So you're teaching harder classes, getting less support to do it. So it's been a lot of trying to figure out, what do I do? How do you try to teach classes to students who have very little English language acquisition at this point, but they're not little kids. They're still teenagers, right? They're all 14 years old. So it's like you don't want to just sort of baby them, and don't find texts that are designed for like first graders trying to learn English stuff, because they're not going to be interested in the topics of that stuff. And so trying to find those resources to design those lessons, that has been like a huge focus for me in the past week and a half in figuring out. There's a whole host of other weird things about how I ended up with these classes, like weird choices I feel like the state has made in terms of how these classes exist alongside my regular English classes. That is way too inside baseball and would be talking about stuff that I don't think it would be good to just sort of like say on the internet. But there's like a whole host of other weird things that go along with that. So this year there has been very little typical. In normal years, it would just be get up at like 5:20 in the morning, head to school. Some days you have what's called duty, where you have to sort of stand in a certain area of the school and kind of help police student behavior to a certain extent as they come into the building. So like making sure that they don't get in fights in the bathroom and stuff like that. Then you go to your classes, you teach your classes, you try to, make your lessons as interesting as possible. Hope that no 14-year-olds kill each other in your class, so that they're safe while they're there. When they're out of my room, that's not my responsibility. I can't deal with that. But once they're in my room, it's like, no, we're all going to be good here. And you just sort of power your way through it and try to do the best you can. And then at 3:00 you go home, and then you're dead tired, and at 4:00 you take a nap. And that's why I'm taking 4:00 naps again, which I stopped doing over the summer. And now it is back in full force.
That sounds good. Some parts of it. The nap sounds nice. The reason you have to take the nap, less nice. But that's interesting, because correct me if I'm wrong, but your training in like school for teaching was not specialized in special ed or second language. So that sounds tough.
Yeah, I mean, in Texas, I think it's every teacher. It's definitely every English teacher has to have an ESL certification, ESL meaning English as a second language. But having an ESL certification and knowing how to teach those classes are two incredibly different things.
Right.
Any English teacher worth their salt could easily get the ESL certification, because it's mostly common sense teacher type questions on the test. You don't need much specialized knowledge outside of review some of the acronyms, because education loves their acronyms. There's a billion acronyms. There's like 5 or 6 of them for the classes I teach, because my class teaches simultaneously. I have ESL students, ELL students, and EBs, emerging bilinguals. They have changed the terminology so often, but you're like, they change the terminology about once a year, but then you have all this documentation from previous years that use the old acronyms, and it's a whole nightmare.
I'm sure there's a logic to it, but emerging bilinguals does sound like a parody of an actual like academic phrase.
Yes. I still don't really understand why English as a second language why that acronym had to go away and then change to English language learners. The difference between those two things feels very slight, especially in the context in which I'm teaching it, where it's like these students are proficient in their native language, and then emerging bilinguals, which is presumptuous because some of them might already be bilingual. They might be ETs, extraterrestrials, and or emerging trilinguals. We don't know.
The only problem I could see with English as a second language is that it probably isn't second for everyone. Many of them probably do have other, but I think people understand second language just means non-native language, which there's there's nothing wrong with everyone has a native language and then another one if they learn one.
It's weird. And my Korean and Chinese student are slowly becoming ETs because they are learning both English and by like immersion Spanish also, because all the other students in the class. Yeah. Because my Vietnamese kid and my Chinese kid are in 2 different classes. So it's like each class is about 16 students who speak Spanish and then 1 student who either speaks Chinese or speaks Vietnamese. But they're really good kids. So like they're all helping each other. Like I've had no behavior issues in those classes. Those classes are kind of fun to teach in
There's
a way.
There's probably a camaraderie about that emerges.
They're together the whole time because they take the same classes. Each sort of area of study has its own teacher that specializes in dealing with these students. So they go to classes together outside of their electives, and they're always together. They're always working with the same paraprofessional that helps translate stuff for them. There is like this sense of like togetherness in that group that is nice. It's just a lot of, for the work on the teacher side, for me, it's like I haven't had to think about how do you teach conjugating verbs, right? Like that's a level of sort of simplified English instruction I've never had to do. And like that gets very complicated because it's like reaching into some knowledge of like things I know, but there's a big difference between knowing something and knowing how to teach it. And I'm having to do completely different lessons for those classes. So yeah, the answer to your question, to the very long rambling answer, is there is no normal day. And especially so far this year, there has not been a normal day.
Well, at least you're not bored.
Yes, that is true. Yes. And I'm having a good time this year. I'm glad that I've not had so far any of the kinds of behavioral stuff. Last year's group of students had some problems. The year before that was just, they were nuts. This year they feel like they will say, like, if I walk into the room and say good morning, they will say good morning back. Like that's a thing I have not had since my first year of teaching. So there's like a simple level of kind of like respect there, and a willingness for them to chat with other students that has been a nightmare since COVID. So all that stuff has been good.
All right.
Let me get to one of my questions. You kind of addressed this a little bit, so I'm going to reframe the question. My original question was just, how's the dissertation coming along? And you can add anything to that if you want to. But then my other one is, what are your favorite footnotes in your dissertation?
Oh my God, I have so many. I love my footnotes. It's actually been a process as I've been going through my revisions of making decisions on cleaning up the footnotes, which a lot of the time means for me like taking them and moving them up into the text when they're important enough, and it's like, okay, this I kind of thought of as an aside, but I should work this into the main text. So I've reduced the number, but what are my absolute favorites? I mean, there's some ones that get into the real nitty-gritty. I will tell you right now, though, the best one in the whole thing is in Chapter 4, which is about the relationship between video games and anime. There's a sentence where, let me see if I can find the sentence. Let's see, I'm talking about... okay, it says, it says, even if one were somehow unaware of Twitch streamers, footnote, Let's Players, footnote, and VTubers, footnote, and then the sentence continues. But I had to explain what all of those were. So it's, Twitch streamers, footnote, referring to those who stream themselves playing video games on the live streaming platform Twitch, the most popular such service in America, where users can interact with streamers via chat and other functionality. Easy to describe, right?
Makes sense.
Okay, Let's Players refers to the genre of video, typically hosted on YouTube, where creators record themselves playing through games along with voiceover, typically lighthearted or humorous. Sometimes the game is played through straightforwardly, and sometimes in a more creative, comical fashion, as in the Let's Play Minecraft series by Rooster Teeth's channel Achievement Hunter, both brands now defunct. I had to add that in between when I wrote it and revised it, which is substantially responsible for popularizing the term. All right, a little more, but there we go. And then, this is exactly about you, Sean, VTubers. VTubers. As Sean Chapman, my podcast co-host and a VTuber aficionado, explained on an episode we did on this topic in 2022, VTubers are, and then I just quote you for a little bit, and then I link to the episode and say you can learn more about this in the episode, and then I had to cite the actual title of the episode, which is just Sean's 30th birthday podcast. So that phrase is...
I love that that's in your dissertation is my 30th birthday podcast episode. Oh my God. Yes. That's one of my favorite podcasts we did though. That one was so fun. Just going through and looking at different clips of random VTubers and chatting about them. I love that will now live on forever in, academia buried in a random footnote.
The fourth chapter has a lot of footnotes explanatory like that because it is about video games and it's about something else, so there just had to be a lot of like extra explanatory information, The other ones, sometimes it's more straightforward. Sometimes I just like to go on weird little tangents that kind of explain something that didn't quite fit into the main text. Like, I like the footnotes. It's where I feel like it's where I can get my academic freak on and just be bizarre about it. Like, I think I gave an example. There's somewhere in here where I'm talking about fan subs and how a lot of early fan subbers became the first generation of official subtitlers at anime distributors in America. So I have a footnote about Stephen J. Simmons, who does all the footnotes for Dragon Ball, and kind of where that came from. And I just, there's little things that I'm passionate about. I feel like the footnotes are definitely where you probably get to know me the best. But I do think for our podcast purposes, the threefer of, oh no, I wrote a sentence with the phrase Let's Players, Twitch streamers, and VTubers, I have to explain all three of those. That's tough.
Yeah, and I just like imagining some stuffy like professor who's, been at this university for decades and decades and decades reading this and being like, what is this VTuber? Let me listen to Sean's 30th birthday podcast and
Yes.
and hear us talk about, Korone playing banjo and kazooie or whatever. And
Yes.
like how would someone interpret that conversation if they have very little context for it? Amuses me.
Okay, one more footnote that I just found looking through this that I know you will like is a very long footnote where this was definitely an addition during revisions of this chapter, but I have the first chapter, part of it is recounting the story leading up to and the day of the release of the first Mobile Suit Gundam film in Japan, and this is remembered as a major turning point in anime history. And a common part of the whole story of Gundam is that it was going to run for a full year, which would be like 51 episodes, and it gets cut down to 43, and that's its final run. And it's usually described as, well, it was probably cut down to 39. They fought for an extra 4 episodes, and that's why it is this weird run of 43. But I could not find a single source in English or Japanese where someone related to the production says that version of it directly, because most of the time when the people involved, like Tomino or Yasuhiko or whoever, talk about it now, it's 40 years later and they have simplified it to, we went from 51 to 43. So I had to explain, I basically just told the story as 51 to 39 back to 43 because I think that's true. But and many different places, not just me, do say it like that, and I cite those. But I said, I haven't been able to source that to someone saying it, but there's a clear logic, and so I have to explain, like, anime is made in course. They're usually 12 to 13 weeks. It would be highly weird to cut middle of a core. If you were canceling the show, you would cancel it for the remainder of the core. And that is why it was probably 39 and then 43. And then I say, further evidence, After War Gundam X was canceled and went down and it only ended up with 39. That is a 300-word footnote explaining that. And it is extremely nerdy, but I also think like it was necessary for the history section.
Yeah, no, it is. I always find that stuff very interesting about TV production in Japan because it's just so different than what we're used to in America. Well, the traditional TV production in America, obviously now it's just like a shit show with streaming and 8-episode seasons and all that kind of stuff. But the core structure, and you can kind of see if you're watching a show, an older Japanese show of like, okay, it's hit 24 episodes. Oh, and weird, now there's like this new character they've just thrown in that wasn't a part of the show anymore. That's like a cool, like, kid-friendly mascot character or something, where you can see where the production blocks are kind of designed and where they start to redirect the show. But that's interesting. I don't think I'd ever realized that we haven't found a direct source for the 39 to 43 jump, even if it seems pretty obvious that that's what happened on the face of it.
It probably exists somewhere in Japanese, but like, I'm obviously somewhat limited in, like, I'm not as fluent as you, and even if I were, I'd have to, like, probably get, like, Yoshiyuki Tomino's memoir, and maybe it talks about it, but maybe it doesn't, and that would be a lot of investment of time and effort for not a guarantee that it would have that piece of information,
Yeah,
so
because I feel like that is probably buried in some ancient issue of like New Type or Animate or something like that, and a lot of that stuff has not been fully digitized, so it's very hard to get access to.
Yeah. So anyway, that is another favorite footnote. But all right, I'll ask you another question, Sean.
All right.
We both, if we didn't say this already, grew up in Colorado. I'm currently back in Colorado. You moved to Texas about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago now, yeah.
Yeah. What's the biggest difference between living in Colorado and living in Texas?
Oh, geez. There's a lot. I'll give a couple. One, a very obvious one is just the, like, weather is super different, right, in the climate.
Yeah.
It is just it is oppressively hot in Texas all the time. The moments where I just, like, laugh to myself is when I go to work in the morning and I get out of my car and I see, like, some of the other teachers get out and they're, like, wearing jackets, and I just, like, cackle maniacally to myself in my head. Because I'm like, why are you wearing... I have yet to encounter a moment where I felt like I really should probably wear a jacket outside in Texas. Even in the dead of winter, it has not gotten really that cold. It gets, like, kind of cold-ish. It'll get down to, like, 40 degrees or something. But it's like, that's not... Who cares? It's like, if I was outside for a long time, maybe I'd want a jacket, but... Not anything longer than that. We're actually, I've checked the weather right now. It's not as bad as it's been recently. It's only 94 degrees right now. It's been over 100 for a while. Yeah, like 94 degrees is like, oh, that's not terrible. So it gets ridiculously oppressively hot. And that's probably like one of the things I dislike the most about Texas. Like I just don't like the weather down here much. I miss snow, but it's more just like how hot it gets is very annoying to me, and I don't like that. Some other like pretty major differences. Well, here's a good one for being a teacher is they pay a lot more than in Colorado. Colorado's got a whole host of sort of political issues that go back to the 90s with Tabor and the sort of state's politics that have put in certain kind of restrictions that make it very, very difficult for teacher pay to increase because it requires people to vote basically on amendments to allow those increases in taxes. And it's just a whole thing. So, Texas is not the best state in the country necessarily to be a teacher, but it's a lot better than Colorado in terms of pay in some things like that. So that's very nice.
In the data, Colorado is very near the worst, just so
yes.
people know. Like
it's like 49, 48 or 49. It's like near the bottom.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a big plus. One that is just like there's a big cultural difference, and this is obviously will also change depending on where you're at in Texas. I'm in kind of like a little bit north of where Houston is, so I'm sort of just generally you'd say in a suburb of Houston. And so if you were in Houston proper, the politics would be more left leaning, but once you're like out of the city, it's pretty hard, right? And that is stuff that I am not a fan of. There's, a very, very harsh Christian bias down here where people just assume everybody else is Christian. And I am not. Like, I don't have anything against anyone who's Christian, but I'm just very much not a religious person. And I always find it kind of amusing the way in which people are not, I think, sort of cognizant when they've lived in a place like this, how strong their bias is towards that and how immediate that assumption is and how much it affects the sort of like the way they think and perceive things. And that is like a thing I'm not a big fan of. And I wish that some people down here had a broader perspective on things like that. And that would be kind of one of the other big ones. So there's just like a lot of little political things that go along with that, with like the attitude towards guns and things like that. That is, very different. Or the attitude towards marijuana, which I have to deal with as a teacher because students, are going to vape THC and stuff like that in the bathrooms. That's just inevitably going to happen. And like seeing those kids have to go to juvie basically for something like that is really...
That's awful.
Yeah, it sucks. And so there's a lot of like little political things like that are one of the other like really big differences. So the climate, not a fan. Teacher pay, am a fan. Politics stuff, not a fan.
Well, there we go. Any food stuff you're a fan of? Texas has good food.
Barbecue. Texas barbecue is very, very good. Yeah.
That's nice.
If you come to Texas, you should get barbecue. It's very, very good.
Awesome. I've been to Texas once. It was Austin, though. I can attest to the heat. Not that anyone would argue with you about that point, but that's just an inarguable fact of life. But yeah, I was there for fun, not for work, so I can't talk about the salaries.
All right. Let me ask you a question. So, Jonathan, you have already fulfilled one lifelong dream by teaching the Giant Robots on Film class over the summer. What's another film studies course that you would like to teach?
Oh, man, there's so many. Honestly, I'm excited just to teach kind of the basic stuff like intro to film or film history because I've seen them taught by lots of people and I know how to do it right, goddammit. And
of course, you know the best way to do it and everyone else has been wrong and you'll do it and it'll be the best way anyone's ever taught it. I'm sure.
I want to put my ideas into action, but anyway, yes, so there's those. I think if I could design a course, like I would love to do a generalized anime course. I think that would be very fun, or animation in general, but, I think I would definitely... There would be the thing, like, how in the game Persona 3, there's the history teacher who he does teach all the history, but he really just wants to talk about the samurai. If I did an animation course, I would do stop motion, I would do Disney, I would do a little CGI, do a little French experimental, what have you, but I would perk up in a different way when I got to do my, unreasonable number of weeks on anime, right? So I think some kind of Japanese animation course would be great. I'd love to figure out how to, work TV into that more, too. I think there's, different things to talk about there. I did have a realization, Sean, the other day. The Endless Eight of Suzumiya Haruhi would fit into a normal screening block at a school. That would be a fun.
Yeah.
I could just make them marathon all 8 of those in one sitting if I wanted to. So I'd like to do something like that. I'd like to do. There's different director courses I'd love to do. Hayao Miyazaki is one who would fit great into a film course because he's made just enough movies to fill a semester, but not so many that you have to pick and choose, right? You don't have like the Kurosawa or Hitchcock problem of like which masterpieces do we narrow it down to. So I would love to do that. And I think at some point, if I could do some kind of video game integrated course, I've always loved to think about like because that's a really tough nut to crack. It's like, it's tougher than, I feel like the scale of like ease to teach is like starts with any kind of literature because getting books is pretty easy. You can get the physical things, you can get them online, people know how to read, that kind of thing, right? And then I think teaching film gets harder because you do have to get people in the room. You have to have the movie. You have to have the time to show it if it's a certain length, all of that. But then video games are a whole other thing because some of them are 90 hours long. And how do you do that? And how do you interact with different skill sets and things like that? And I've noticed it often tends towards either watching people play video games, which is not the same as playing video games, or it tends towards shorter indie games, which are worth studying, but are a subset. So I'd love to have to put a syllabus together and try to crack that nut.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things of like, the streaming stuff that is still in development. It's not something that I think I would ever really want to use personally, but in an education context, that feels like that is like a great equalizer. Once it eventually like becomes something that is like commonplace enough and easy enough to access, that feels like that would be one thing that helps sort of like level the playing field a bit of accessibility to the games. And then, yes, you're right, because this is also something I've obviously thought about because it's such a fun, we both love games, but it's such a like a thing that is outside the normal scope of like things that you would teach. But the thing that would be very hard to deal with is the skill levels on top of that. And like, you don't want to have a class that is like, well, you have to be good enough at video games to take this class. Feels like a weird prerequisite, though, obviously you have to be good enough at like literary analysis to take your Moby Dick class or whatever. There is a certain precedent for the difficulty of the subject matter. You sort of like predicates you need to have a certain amount of experience. Like you can't, you're not going to take a Ulysses focused class if you're a first year English student. Like that's just going to be madness. But it does feel like the video game thing is slightly different than that.
Yes, because I'm not even convinced that film studies is the right place for video game studies to go.
Yeah.
And I think that's a whole issue. Film studies used to be part of literature departments and gradually built off of that. I think video games have started in film studies departments because it is the closest thing in a college, but like I could also see it branching out of like theater studies because video games are performance to some degree, and I think that could be a natural place for it to go. Obviously, ultimately, you would want its own department where they could invent their own pedagogy for it. And so film is it's an unnatural place to have it that you have to kind of graft onto. I'd also love to teach any kind of like genre study class. I think it would be fun to do different genres. Like I was thinking recently, I've been watching a lot of horror movies recently. I've been thinking, there's so many interesting horror movies, but a lot of them I wouldn't spring on students in the context of like an intro to film or a film theory, because it would be, if there's enough blood or something, it would be alienating. But if I could teach a class like on the slasher movie, everyone knows what they're getting into. So I get to just say at the beginning, a lot of people going to get murdered on screen in this class. If you don't want to take the class, that's fine. But no one's forcing you, but that's what the class is. That would be a fun way to teach stuff like that.
Yeah, genre classes was always my favorite for like English. Like my favorite was the Gothic horror class I took, which was incredibly fun and had a bunch of movies and literature in it. Yeah, I feel like the genre classes are where teachers get to be like that Sengoku era history teacher in Persona 3, which I like that you brought that character up because he's my favorite teacher of the Persona series because it's so true. It's like most of the Persona teachers are big, very, very ridiculous and kind of so outside the realm of like, anything even related to being a teacher. But that dude who's just like, the one thing I want to teach is so passionate. I just want to do the Warring States period. God damn it. And that is like, has to just sort of slog his way through everything else. It's kind of how I feel when it's like, God, I got to do a whole unit on fucking informational texts. Great. Yeah. Okay. Let's find the author's purpose in this newspaper article, guys. It's like, can I please teach the most dangerous game for the love of God? Like, let me get there, please.
Yes. So yeah, and that giant robots class that I've taught about on other podcasts, that was a genre studies class.
Yeah.
It's a weird, broad kind of genre that I formed, but it's a real thing, right? And obviously anime gives you a bunch to do with that would be fun to do. But yeah. All right, Sean, speaking of like passions we have as teachers, if you could teach any book in ninth grade English that you think you would probably get in trouble for teaching in ninth grade English, what book would it be?
I was very excited that you said ninth grade English. Because the reality of teaching ninth grade English is it's hard to do books. At least at the schools that I've worked at. If
you want to broaden it to high school, that's fine.
Yes. If we push to like 10 honors, which I taught at my last school, because I've only taught ninth grade since then, because I currently teach at a school. This is one of the weird things in Texas that when I say this. When I moved here, I didn't believe it. And if you say this to like anyone who lives anywhere else in America, they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? I teach at a school that only teaches ninth grade students, which is a common thing in Texas, that you have a branch of a larger high school that is just where all the ninth graders are, because that's how many fucking kids we have down here. Like, there's so many of them. You have an entire school. You have, again, any major high school basically has its own ninth grade sort of sub-campus. That is effectively its own school. It operates completely independently. I go to the main high school campus like 2 times a year for a whole school meeting. And every time I go there, I'm like, why are you making me come here? Because all the stuff going on at this campus has nothing to do with the campus that I actually work at. It's very weird. So, I'm very much stuck in the ninth grade world. The reality of the ninth grade world is that you're not doing a lot of novels because they take a very long time. And with my clientele, their home lives are not conducive to, you cannot expect them to go home and read 2 chapters of a book. It's just not going to happen. Some of them don't have homes. So it's like, you just can't have that. If you're in ninth grade honors, that's a different thing. Regular ninth grade, it's just not really happening that much. So we mostly do short stories and poems and articles. With 10 honors, where I taught some things like Catcher in the Rye, All Quiet on the Western Front, which that's probably the most fun thing I've ever taught, was All Quiet. That's such a great book, and it's such a fun topic because you just get to dive into World War I stuff. I would show the Peter Jackson documentary where he, his team modified the footage to colorize it and all that kind of stuff, and that played so well to those kids to make it more real and accessible. So All Quiet was incredibly fun, and I would love to be able to teach that again. If I were to do my own book, and again, at probably about a 10 honors level, I'd probably do Dubliners, the short story collection by James Joyce, which is incredibly rich book. Every short story is so good. They all kind of build out this really potent sense of time and place to Dublin in the late 1800s, early 1900s when it was written. And it features all these different kinds of people from different walks of life that hit on all these different themes about like gender and growing up and like socioeconomic disparities in class, colonialism with like the British. It's such a great short story collection. It's my favorite short story collection. And it would be nice to do a short story collection because you could pick and choose stories a little bit. So I think Dubliners would be pretty long if you did everything, but you could pick, a few of the best ones and then have a long section on The Dead, which is the last short story, which is just phenomenal. And I think it would be pretty high level for a 10 honors. So it'd be good at like the end of the year and kind of help pull them up a little bit, but it's nicely situated in like a larger sort of realistic social studies context as well. So that would be a big one. If I could do like an AP class, then it would be, I'd love to, man, it's like Moby Dick is way too long, but like maybe pick some chapters, like cut down some of like Moby Dick, because that book is so absolutely phenomenal. So something like that. I don't know. The thing that jumps out to me immediately is the Dubliners would be very, very fun to teach.
Awesome. That's a good answer.
All right. So I guess next up is one of mine. Here's a good question for you, Jonathan. When are you going to put out 300 Reviews, the sequel to your hit book 200 Reviews by Jonathan Lack, which is available now both physically and digitally on Amazon.com and the Kindle store?
Thank you so much for the plug. That's so nice. Yes, you can buy it wherever, not wherever books are sold, but on the internet in several places.
Yeah.
No, yeah, so I did publish that last year. I think, delightfully titled 200 Reviews. I think it's, it's what it says on the tin. I have actually already a planning document of
Great.
Items because I've published a lot since that book came out. I have stuff that I got ready for that book, but I cut because I had the 200 cutoff, right? And then this whole movie of the week thing, I have more stuff coming. So, hopefully in the next, obviously, so that, let's see, 200 reviews came out in October. We're almost at October of this year. Maybe October of next year, like 2 years on, it would be fun to do another collection. I just, because I figured out how to do it in terms of all the formatting and everything with 200 reviews for the different versions, because I put the Kindle version and the print version together myself, which was a lot of learning had to go into that, but now I know how to do it and I have the format. I would like to do it again, and I've been trying to figure out with myself, is it 200 more reviews, and that's the title? Is it 300 reviews, as you say? Is it 201 reviews? And we just go that way. I guess it would also kind of partially depend on what I have, but I like the idea of putting this stuff into print and having it out for posterity's sake. So I am already thinking about it. You caught me. I have a document the document on my desktop is 200 more reviews. We'll see if that's what it actually winds up being called, but yeah.
Well, I've also got a pitch for you that I think would be a great book. An inside joke that a very small number of people would find funny, and an absolutely insane logistical nightmare. But when I made this question, it occurred to me that the funniest thing you could possibly do in the world is make a book called 300 Reviews, which is 300 different reviews of the movie 300.
300. I mean, that would be the fun thing to do with that would be to get 300 different critics.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That would be the logistical nightmare. It's you got to find 300 different movie critics to all give you their reviews of 300. Hopefully some new ones, not just bring out the old one from RogerEbert.com or something like that. Get something fresh. And again, it would only, the inside joke would only make sense to people who know that you wrote a book called 200 Reviews.
200 reviews,
But
yes.
300 reviews, which is just 300 reviews of 300, would be the funniest thing in the world.
If I write a book called 300 Reviews, I'll definitely have to include a review of the movie 300. That's non-negotiable. Yeah. The thing is, that would be a great thing to... There's all sorts of movies where that would be an awesome thing to do, and I think these probably exist. But, if you wanted to put out a book of 300 different reviews of Citizen Kane, I'd buy that right now. That sounds great.
Oh, absolutely.
The thing about the movie 300 is I'm not sure it really would support that.
No,
it's a fairly shallow movie.
Yeah, I don't think it would support that level of academic scrutiny. I think, about 2 or 3 reviews is probably about where you top out until eventually you get the, you get your, action, cool. And then you get your, this is pretty dated. And then you get your, man, this movie's obscenely racist. And then you're done. You got your 3 takes on 300 there already. And then, you just multiply that by 100 and you got a whole book.
There is also the possibility of doing it like the, Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya Endless 8, where I just have to watch the movie 300 times and write about it over and over and over, and it would take years of work to get done, and at the end, no one would read it, but it would probably be cited as a wild avant-garde experiment in the art of film criticism.
Yes, because 300 that's a lot. That's a lot, because 300 reviews sort of it makes sense in some ways as a sequel to 200 reviews. But if you had to do 300 more reviews, that's a lot of 300. You'd have to have 100 more reviews in that book. That'd be a big book.
Yeah. All right, Sean, this is a corollary to my last question.
Yeah.
What is the worst book that is commonly taught in high school English, this can be anywhere in high school, that you wish you could Thanos snap out of existence?
I haven't even taught this book, thank God I haven't, but was The Boy in the Striped Pajamas.
I thought you were going to say that, yeah.
I mean, because, I'm sure that there are some people who would hear this question and be like, I hated The Scarlet Letter, or I was like, oh, why do we do this, that, or the other thing? It's those books are fun.
Yeah, I mean this as a teacher, you think has a negative educational influence. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's The Boy in the Striped Pajamas I hate that book has come to this, sort of, that's how you teach the Holocaust kind of thing. Which again,
especially when The Diary of Anne Frank is right there. And that's not the only one. There's obviously other text you could use, but it's when there is a canonical choice right there and you would pick the weird airbrushed version of the Holocaust. It's bizarre.
Yeah, because, like, I definitely, I know why there are, like, a lot of people who chafe at the sort of, like, classic novels that get taught, like Great Gatsby or Catcher in the Rye. But I would posit that those people chafe because they may have had not great English teachers, not because those books are not good, right? Like, because I think a good English teacher can make those books fun and accessible. And, like, I feel like that's what I did with my 10 honors class. Like, most of the, like, reception and feedback I got from my students is that they really liked doing All Quiet on the Western Front. They really liked doing Great Gatsby. Catcher in the Rye a bit less, but that's because when we got to Catcher in the Rye, that's when the pandemic hit. So that was that one. That's what's a little bit harder to do.
What a miserable book to have to read during the pandemic.
Yep.
Oh my God. Like, that's because that's a book about an isolated person going slowly mad. That's not okay.
Yeah, but like a lot of those classic novels, they're so good, and if you hated them, I think people like could go back and read them again as an adult with like fresh eyes, and they are really phenomenal. But then then you have something like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and that's in a different category.
All right.
So now it's mine for you. Let's see. Let's stick on. We were on this education theme. I've got a couple more on that theme. So let's do this one. What's the most slapped together at the last minute class or lesson you have ever taught?
Oh my God. I don't know if I could actually like remember the exact one, but there's definitely. Usually, I'm pretty ahead of things. Like for instance, for like my weekly column I have on my site right now, I have ones already ready to go for like December. I like to be ahead of the curve and have it ready to go. Once in a while, that is just not an option. And usually, like, if I've ever done a lecture or anything, I'm definitely ready ahead of time. But sometimes, like, the way it works when you're getting your master or your PhD, sometimes your master's degree, is you're often the teaching assistant. So you are there for the lectures the professor does, but then you do these, they're sometimes called recitation sections, they're sometimes called discussion sections that are usually on Friday in breakout groups, and you have to teach those. And those are such a weird and frankly kind of miserable mix of things to do because you can prepare up to a point, but I do have to see what the professor does with the lecture before I can nail anything down, right? Mm-hmm. I have to see what it's going to look like, at least the first time I teach it. And sometimes the professor will go in a wildly different direction, and then I have to improvise based on his improvisations. And so it would definitely be one of the discussion sections. I remember there was a film class, I think it was contemporary cinema is one of the ones I did. No, I always prepared for that one. It must have been 1602, which was our film for non-major. It was intro to film for non-majors. And I think the first time I assistant taught that, I decided to mostly go without PowerPoints because I kind of wanted to challenge myself and try to do it a little more loose. But it definitely resulted in ones where I was kind of off the cuff, just experimenting with things. Mm-hmm. I don't even want to tell this story, but I know the worst one I ever did. I know the most slapped together one I ever did. In that class, we had a week on documentary cinema. And at the same time, I was in a class with a celebrated academic who, truly wonderful guy, wonderful academic, had kind of a weird teaching style. He was retired at this point, had come back to do this grad seminar. So I was a student in this grad seminar. And what he often did in his classes is he just read out his own papers that he had written in the past that were our readings. And we kind of stopped and talked about them as he went through them. And there was the week where we did documentary cinema, and I think for whatever reason, there was like a swerve, and I didn't really know what to do that week. So I was like, I'll do what Dr. X does in his class with the grad students, and I pulled out one of my old pieces of writing on the movie Borat, and I think I showed a clip or two of Borat, and I was trying to get them to think about like the line between documentary, mockumentary, comedy, that sort of thing. But it went over so terribly. They didn't want to like read through the piece with me and do the discussion. And I think I had had to change. I had like 3 sections of that class, and I think by the end of the day of those 3, I had completely abandoned my initial concept and tried something else.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important in teaching those. Like sometimes you have to try something new, and then you're like, oh shit, well this didn't work. And then then you're like, well, third period's going to get a very different experience of this lesson. Yes, but
sometimes teaching is like you're a stand-up comic who's really honed their routine. You know what lines the students will respond to. You know what, kind of works, where to put the pauses. And then sometimes you are doing crowd work off the seat of your pants, right? Yes. and it can be very, very traumatizing.
Yes, just picturing that is pretty horrifying. Like the
I'm
scenario
sorry.
you've laid out for that class. They get, it's important to try things.
Here's a question I thought about.
You had a weird model, the teacher, that it sounds like what that dude was doing sounds pretty strange to me. Let's read through stuff that I have written. I wouldn't do that.
And again, that was a separate class that I was a grad student in taking, but that was, he was a professor emeritus who had, truly one of the, probably 5 most distinguished people in the history of this field. I was very lucky to get to take a class with him, but he also, he wasn't making PowerPoints and lesson plans at that point. So, yeah. Anyway, Sean, this is a question I thought, we're recording this a little before you guys are hearing it, so the Democratic National Convention just happened.
Yeah.
And I got to ask, Sean, how does it feel to have a fellow public school teacher repping the profession on the Democratic ticket with Tim Walz, Coach Walz, teacher Mr. Walz, Governor Walz? Because of that, the Democratic Convention had way more love for public school teachers than we usually see at these things. And I like it because I think public school teachers are good. It's one of the reasons I like Tim Walz. Seems like everyone likes him because he seems like the kind of teacher we all remember and like. But I wanted to ask you about it since you actually are in those trenches every day.
Yeah, well, I watched live that Pennsylvania event where they, Shapiro opened it up, and then it's where they introduced Tim Walz on the national stage for the first time. I teared up watching that. Particularly it was Kamala Harris going through introducing him, and it's it is that way of where teachers just get shit on so much in politics. It's just sort of what ends up happening, and you have this whole what books can we teach and all of this and that and the other thing, and the political fucking quagmire and bullshit that just gets rained down from on high onto public schools by people who have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. It's just the constant background radiation of this job being a public school teacher.
Yeah.
And so having somebody that the thing with this guy, more important than he served 20-something years in the National Guard, which obviously that's really great and impressive, but it felt like the bigger and more important thing is this guy was a social studies teacher, he was a coach for his school's football team, and he was the staff sponsor for his school's Gay Straight Alliance in the 90s when those were rare. And it's that being the stuff that to me felt obviously that I responded to the most about him, but also it felt like that's what the sort of broader base kind of really responded to. That was really heartening. And I love Tim Walz so much. I just think he's such a amazing guy and just such an unusual politician. I love that on the surface, he feels like he is the sort of classically forged Republican in so many ways, of this guy who grew up in this tiny town in Nebraska, who went and served in the military, and he's this crack shot with a gun, and he was a football coach and all that stuff. And it's your sort of traditional image of the Republican, and he's obviously an older white guy. All those things feel you'd look at Tim Walz and just assume that. But then he is this very progressive, extraordinarily compassionate person that I think just brings so much kind of the sense of love and family to the political campaign. It's great. Yeah, I love Tim Walz. I'm a huge fan. 2 thumbs up. He just seems like an amazing guy.
Well, and it's just, most people who run for president are lawyers, in their background, or professors or professor lawyers, like Barack Obama, right? So it is cool to see someone who, if you're a public school teacher, you really do have to interact with real people every day, right? That is his background, and it is meaningful. And I love the whole story that it was his class that encouraged him to run for Congress. It also means that he is someone who at no point in his life was preparing a political run until it kind of happened. And that is also a nice thing that feels good on this ticket and refreshing. It's cool. Any kind of time you get more, frankly, variety in terms of background experience on tickets like this, it's always good. And particularly from a public school teacher, fuck yeah.
Because it's who better to run the country? If you can't run a classroom of 20-something 14-year-olds, how could you expect to be able to run a nation or a state or whatever, or a city? And it's it's really great. I love him. I love how sort of off the cuff his speaking style is. Like everything about him and his affectations is just so genuine, which is a thing that is extraordinarily rare in politics. Like even politicians that I really like, they don't feel genuine most of the time. He feels truly genuine.
Yeah. I also want to praise his convention speech was like 15 minutes long.
Yes.
And it was just right to the point. It was good. I feel like that's a man who has learned at some point in his life you can't just talk for an hour. Bill Clinton. Sometimes you got to just let other people do it.
Yeah, he knows it's not the sage on the stage, man. It's like you gotta get in there, do some group work. Like the students have to do the work. Like your speech, your like direct instruction. Keep it short, keep it sweet. You're not waiting, hanging on fucking claps and applause for minutes and minutes at a time. You just got to work through that. It's great. All right, so let's go to one of my questions. See if I have any other good educational ones. I'm going to go off on a different track now because I think I've kind of used up most of mine that are on that track. Here's a dumb question for you, Jonathan. So I know you have a habit of buying limited edition soda flavors. What is a flavor you have not yet seen that you really wish someone would make?
Oh my God, that's a fun question. I just tried the other day. I was by a Burger King. And I went there, and they have this new, like, spicy menu. They're calling it their fiery menu. And they had a fiery strawberry Sprite. And I was like, that sounds interesting. I'll give that a try.
Fiery strawberry Sprite?
And they had it listed as, like, the mild, not spicy thing. So I thought what it was going to be was just, like, a strawberry Sprite with, like, a little bit of a tang or something to it, right? But no, it was actually, you would drink it, and you go, oh, strawberry. And then you would go, oh, my mouth is kind of on fire. It was not right. And I like spicy foods, but when it's in drink form, it's wrong because the spice winds up going down like your esophagus. Yeah. It's completely wrong. That was bad. God, Mountain Dew does like most of them, I feel like.
Yeah, it's definitely
so it's hard to know.
Kind of made it their brand is that they come out with
it's hard to know what a new one would be. I think, I don't know if I've ever tasted an Mountain Dew that was like, did like an apple juice kind of flavor in there. Mountain Dew usually goes on the citrusy side of things, like orange fruit punch, something like that. I think an apple juice kind of mix-in would be good. Sprite does the Sprite lemonade mix now. That's good. That's a better version of Sprite, frankly, than the basic one. I also, the other day, I was at the grocery store, and they had Sunny D for like $1. They were trying to get rid of them.
Nice.
Now, I think most of those, and I know this for a fact, are for college students mixing it with vodka. That's what Sunny D is usually sold for. It's either for small children or it is for college students mixing with vodka, as I remember, because the smell of Sunny D for many years disgusted me because of the room down the hall where I went to college in my dorm, and the dudes were drinking all the time. But I just mixed it with Sprite, and that's a good cocktail. Something like that is also good.
The Sunny D's good. I mean, I haven't had it in maybe 10 years. But yeah. I remember the last time, like, there was a point in college where I was like, Sunny D was good, and I bought a thing of Sunny D. I'm like, yeah, Sunny D's still good. And it made me happy about the world. Because if I, like, if you do that with, like, Kool-Aid, you're like, oh, God, Kool-Aid's just garbage.
Yes.
Sunny D's still good, though.
Yeah. I think it's a little hard for me to drink on its own because it's basically really, really sweet orange juice. And I, like, as an adult, my palate just likes, frankly, the less sweet the orange, like, let it be more natural. But you mix it with something and it can be good. Anyway, I'm going to go with some kind of Mountain Dew, but it is trying to do an apple flavor.
How about cinnamon apple pie Mountain Dew?
That sounds really good. Honestly, I would try that. And I should stress, I don't like go out and do this every day. It's more like if I'm at the gas station or the grocery store and I see a silly one, I do feel compelled to give it a try.
Yeah, it's just one of those quirks about you, Jonathan.
I'm a weirdo. All right, let's see. I have a bunch of silly questions I can ask you. Let's see. I'm going to go with this one. Sean, this news broke while we didn't have a podcast to talk about it, but I really wanted to hear your thoughts. So here we go, 2 months late. What are your thoughts on Robert Downey Jr. playing Dr. Doom in the upcoming Marvel stuff? Because you're a big, just for reference, you're a comic reader. I know you specifically, like, Fantastic Four is something you love and have been excited for Marvel to do right, because they've done it wrong a bunch. And I know you're into Dr. Doom. What are you thinking about this possible power move, possible desperation move from Marvel?
Oh, it's a desperation move for sure. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I think the question is, like, do you like the desperation move or not? I'm not a huge fan conceptually because I think for me, what I want from Marvel is for them to make a bigger break. from what they have done. And the fear I have with the Robert Downey Jr. casting is that you're not doing that unless you're going to ultimately do some sort of weird multiverse something or other with that. Like, I just don't have faith that they would just do this because they're like, no, Robert Downey Jr. just legitimately, he was the best choice. I feel like it's we can regenerate buzz for our brand if we recast Robert Downey Jr. and then we can do a weird pseudo Iron Man, Doctor Doom, some fuckery in our Avengers movie. And I just kind of want them to do a good Fantastic Four movie without any of that and those considerations. And then on top of that, Robert Downey Jr. is kind of a weird choice for Doom. Like, I associate Doom with having this kind of like incredible gravitas. He is a king, like he's literally a king. And so that's so much of his energy and his appeal is that sense of like royal power and authority and like his own sense of righteousness. Obviously he's a villain, but in his mind he is this truly righteous being who's like passing down judgment on people inferior to him and stuff like that. And Robert Downey Jr. is a very good actor. If I see the performance, maybe he can capture that energy. Like, I don't want to disregard his skills as an actor, but it's not the thing I think of when I think of Robert Downey Jr. Does not really carry that kind of quality to him. And so on both kinds of sides, the stunt aspect of it indicates a direction that I'm not necessarily a big fan of. And just the casting in a vacuum is kind of a question mark. But the casting in a vacuum being a question mark, there are plenty of roles where we have seen that before, like Heath Ledger as the Joker, where you hear it for the first time in its original context. You're like, huh, that's weird. And then you see the performance and you totally get it. I totally think that could happen. But just going off of the news, it doesn't make me super enthusiastic about that choice.
Yeah. To give my 2 cents, I will say I'm glad they are investing in Doctor Doom. I'm glad they're taking that character seriously. Although, if what he is evil Tony Stark, no, that's dumb. And if they're doing that,
and I'm very worried that's what it is.
Yeah, so we'll see. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I think I'm more open to it if for no other reason than I do genuinely think the idea of taking an actor who played a different iconic role and bringing him in to play a new iconic role, I think that's fun. I think if this were if you took out all the other desperation and money considerations, the idea of taking your most famous Marvel actor and plopping him in a totally different role is a great acting exercise. Like, I would love to see that in a different context. Like, it was fun in Deadpool and Wolverine to see Chris Evans come back and do the Human Torch for a couple of scenes, because that's like an interesting thing because he had been in this world only as Cap for a while, for a long time, obviously. But like, so that could be cool. The problem is all the surrounding context of if the Marvels had not grossed a full $1 billion less than Captain Marvel, would they be doing this? No, of course not. Like, if they were still if they were able to launch new franchises and characters, would they be doing this? Fuck no. Like, that is just an easy no. And like, they had to, the report is Robert Downey Jr. is being paid upwards of $80 million for these 2 movies. Like, that is probably his base salary and then points on the back end. It will be the biggest payday either ever or since Jack Nicholson as the Joker in 1989. So like, it's a lot. And I understand why Robert Downey Jr. didn't say no to that. That's a lot of money. I get it. I'm not going to judge someone for that necessarily, but, that's the reason they're doing this, and they're bringing back the Russo brothers. It just stinks of, we have not had a hit like Avengers Endgame since Avengers Endgame, and most of them have been pretty problematic. So yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it has the stink of them sort of just scrambling desperately. Whereas if this was a thing that they announced like shortly after Endgame as like, this is the direction we're going in, I think in that context I would have been like, oh, that's crazy and weird, because but in like an interesting way, because you wouldn't have been lived in a world where Robert Downey Jr. was out of the MCU for like 5 years or whatever. But like, that happening now just feels very strange. It also just raises big questions for me of they're doing these 2 Avengers movies, and I just, again, who the fuck are the Avengers now? Like, who are the Avengers in that movie? I mean, I know they're doing the new Captain America with Falcon. Is Doctor Strange an Avenger? Is Spider-Man an Avenger? Is Thor going to be in that movie? Like, who the fuck are the fucking Avengers these days? I just have no idea.
Well, the only people we know are in them are RDJ and the 4 Fantastic Four members. Those are the only cast members who have been confirmed for those 2 movies. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious to see where Marvel goes. I don't, I'm not confident in it, but At least they're trying something, you know. They're obviously, you know, they're totally scrapping all their King the Conqueror stuff for two reasons, I think. One, I think they might have ended up kind of scrapping that shit anyways, but obviously you have the whole actor situation on top of that.
They had, honestly, even without the actor thing, after Ant-Man 3 bombed at the box office and that was the setup for their entire new phase, you have to, because the audience didn't see the thing that set it up, you know?
Yeah, so, you know, it's at least they're like, you know, they're trying something, you know, that's, I can give them that.
So we will see. All right, I guess it's your turn.
Yes. So I actually read a kind of similar question, but it's more open-ended. What's something, Jonathan, that has happened or that you've done since we ended the Weekly Stuff podcast that you want to talk about, but is not in your set of what you're going to say for our like variety, what we've watched and seen section?
Oh man, that's a good question.
Any news or any media or stuff you've engaged with that you weren't otherwise going to talk about?
I got really into Prince. I haven't talked about that.
Yeah, right. Yes, I'm sort of aware of that because you've been reviewing all the movies and stuff, right?
I did his first two. I did Purple Rain and Under the Cherry Moon, and I have some of his other movies. I haven't watched or reviewed those yet. I listened to all of his 80s discography. I have not yet gone forward and done his 90s and stuff after that, but I've been going through that. And I mean, every album he recorded in the 80s is a banger. Like, my background is I'd always been aware of Prince. I'd heard some of the hits. I was not, like, a big fan, but I also, like obviously, if you hear a Prince song, it's a good song. If you're going to tell me Prince songs aren't good, you can fuck off. But, like, I hadn't really done the deep dive. And then I wound up watching Purple Rain because they put out this new 4K Blu-ray of it, and I got that, and I was really curious about it. And I loved that movie, and that actually wound up being the first movie of the week column that I did for the new paid subscriptions on jonathanlife.com. And I wound up listening to, like I said, I actually started on the drive to Colorado from Iowa when I moved. I just started with, I think his first 80s album is Dirty Mind, and I started there and was going through those, and I think on one day of the trip I did Dirty Mind, Controversy, 1999, and Purple Rain all in a row, and that was a very good day because those albums just slap. I think the thing about Prince that just fascinates me, and I really love everything I've ever heard from him, is that he was one of the biggest stars on Earth in his time. I mean, you know, especially when you're looking at like the era of Purple Rain. Purple Rain is one of the highest selling albums of all time. He was so big, and he always had popularity up until his death, obviously. But he was also a true avant-garde. Like, his music is experimental. Like, Purple Rain is the most pop thing he ever did, and Purple Rain still has stuff like When Doves Cry that cuts out the bass line and does these experimental drum machine riffs and all this stuff. So, you know, the majority of his music is in a much more experimental vein where he's trying weird different things. My favorite song of his is from the album Sign of the Times, which is generally considered his best album, and I would agree. It is the album that like most encapsulates all the different sides of Prince, in part because it was constructed from 3 different albums he made, decided not to release, and then did more and took all the pieces and put them into one mega album called Sign of the Times. He was fucking insane. He would just record full albums and then bury them because he wasn't satisfied or something. Like, there are still, like, their new Prince music will be coming out for decades to come. But anyway, Sign of the Times, my favorite song is It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night, which is the penultimate song on that. It's a 10-minute dance track, and it interpolates the oh-wee-oh, ooh-oh from The Wizard of Oz. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of fucking weirdo he was, and I love it. I love that energy. I love all the different experiments he did. I love how just incandescently horny his music is. Oh my god, particularly his very early stuff. Like, it's kind of funny, Purple Rain is the album that caused there to now be the parental advisory labels on music, because in the Reagan administration in Congress, there were these hearings about people being mad about the lyrics of Darling Nikki, which has a line about her masturbating. Like, Darling Nikki is like the least explicit song he had released up to that point. His stuff on his earlier albums, there's a song on Controversy, I think, that is just the last like 5 minutes of it is him. I don't know if he was actually doing it or if it's simulated, but it's the sound of him masturbating or getting a blowjob or something. Like, and he's just over a sick beat. And so, you know, all of that is great. I think his Batman album from 1989 is phenomenal. It's such an interesting piece of, basically, it's not really a soundtrack to the movie. It is, they gave him a work print of the movie. He went to Paisley Park, his studio, and he spent time with the movie and made an album about the movie and using parts of the movie as a sample, and basically wore that print into the ground making it. And so it is this weird pop album that is inspired by and responding to a big blockbuster while also being its soundtrack. There's no comparison to that. No one else has ever done anything like that. So I have been on that kick, love listening to his stuff. It's great. And at some point I'll do the rest of his body of work. He has a lot of music. And the way I like to listen to music is I like to really get to know it. It's hard for me to just like listen to an album and then move on to the next one. I've got to hear it a couple times and really learn the music. And Prince has like 40 albums, so, he's got a lot.
Awesome. Well, I knew you had something. I knew that there would be something if I asked that question, that some, like, rabbit hole you'd gone down, so.
Yeah, and that's going to be, I don't think we have that segment today on the show, but we're going to have a segment in future episodes called, Hey, Listen, where we basically do this, and we both tell each other about something we wouldn't otherwise talk about on the podcast.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, I have to ask you a question. I'm going to go with a super silly question, all right?
All right.
Sean, would you rather have dinner at Hannibal Lecter's house? You don't know where he got the meat. It could be human. It might not be. That is up to him, and he's not going to tell you, as is his wont. Or you have to live for a year in the world of Mobile Suit Victory Gundam during the time of the show's events.
Jesus. Wait, so it was one night of dinner at Hannibal?
Yeah, just one dinner party at Hannibal Lecter's house.
Yeah,
you do have to eat the food. You have to be polite. But, it could be cannibalism. It might not be. It's going to taste good either way, which is going to make it all the more disturbing for you. But, yeah. Or you spend a year living in the world of Mobile Suit Victory Gundam.
Well, I mean, I think my chances of surviving are higher with the Hannibal one. I mean, he might kill me. That could happen. Obviously, he's a serial killer. But he might not. If I'm in the world of Victory Gundam, there's like a 95% chance I'm fucking dead. I'm getting run over by a giant fortress shaped like a fucking wheel, or they are nuking the shit out of me, or I have to live in some fucking post-apocalyptic winter at the end of that series. There's just, I'm not living. Like, that's not, look, I'm not a new type. I'm not like a plucky young boy, with a bright future ahead of him. I'm just gonna get fucking murdered. And it's probably not even, I'm probably not even going to be around that long. So I'll take the Hannibal one.
All right. Hannibal doesn't usually kill the people who come to his house for dinner. He's serving them. He's doing something else bad to them, but he's not killing them.
Yeah. Look, like, I didn't kill the dude I'm eating. It's like, I'm not going out of my way to do the cannibalism, but like, I'm not dying, and I'm not like impinging my own morals because I'm not involved in that. So Hannibal's the guy who's at fault there, not me. So I'm fine there. The Victory Gundam world, I just don't want to be there. Please don't make me go there.
Even if you live, you're gonna have to make some really tough choices at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not living unless I've murdered somebody. It's just a bad place to be.
All right.
Let me give you one of mine. This is a related thing. This is on a similar sort of wavelength of what you just gave me. Jonathan, I want to make it clear, okay? This is a completely hypothetical question. Purely hypothetical. It's just a hypothetical, okay? If, hypothetically, you were to murder somebody, what would you do with the bodies? Just hypothetically.
I have this question on my list for you, too. I wrote, if you had to kill someone, I know you probably wouldn't, for fun. I'm just saying if you had to, for whatever reason, how would you do it, and how would you dispose of the body to maximize your chances of not getting caught? So we were thinking, This is disturbing. But okay, if I had to, I mean, honestly, probably I would look up which police, county in the country has the lowest clearance rate of murders and go do it there, right? Like, is it Chicago? What's Chicago's murder rate clearance at this point? Like 15%? There's some places in the country where, frankly, the odds are with you if you kill someone that they'll never find you. So probably do that. And then, it's tough. If you bury the body in a shallow grave, they're going to find it. If you throw it in the river, they're going to find it. I think it's tough. I think probably the best would be, like, in New Mexico, where there's all the desert, like on Breaking Bad, because you could probably go far out enough and bury it that no one would ever actually find it if you were careful enough. That's probably the best place to do it if you're being not romantic about it, but just like purely utilitarian.
Yeah, I mean, in Texas, I'm close enough to the ocean, that like realistically, you cut it up, get in some bags, drive over to the ocean, and just put something to weight it down and just get it in there. That's I think that's probably pretty easy overall to do, and unlikely for the body to be found, or at least if it
you just got to remember the tide comes back in, right?
Yeah.
So you got to...
It'll be found, long enough, and there'll be enough, decay. Some, fish will be chewing on that fucking thing. It ain't going to get back to me.
I did watch the show. Have you seen Ripley on Netflix, the Talented Mr. Ripley miniseries? It's fucking great. You should watch it. The way he disposes of the body, he almost gets it. He kills the guy, he puts him in the boat, and then he weighs the boat down with rocks. He just does it in the wrong part of the ocean. He does it in kind of like a shallow bay. I think if you did it further out, he would have been good to go.
Yeah, you gotta go far enough out that the ocean is incredibly deep. Absolutely. Yeah, you're not doing it right in the shallows. You got to get out there. But the ocean, it's deep, man. It's 3-dimensional space. There's just a lot of volume there. They ain't finding that shit, hypothetically.
If James Cameron was a serial killer, he probably would be very prolific because he knows all the best spots. He's been to the Marianas Trench. He could have hidden a body there and we wouldn't even know.
Exactly. Why do you think he went to the Marianas Trench? That was the whole point. It's you came up with that's his cover story, is the documentary.
The catering team on Avatar really pissed him off. All right. So now that we've incriminated ourselves, all right. I guess it's my turn because you asked that. Mm-hmm. All right. I'll go with another silly challenge one. Challenge, Sean. We put you in a room. You've got limited food and water. It's enough to survive, but no other human contact. There are 2 ways to get out. 1. You can play Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 to absolute completion. All the trophies, all the achievements. You got to do it on original hardware, no cheats. PS3 or 360, your choice.
Oh, 360.
Or you have to sit down and read every Harry Potter book cover to cover, and you're gonna get quizzed on stupid fiddly little details like how many points they got in the last Quidditch match at random intervals to make sure you're doing the work. You can't just sit there looking at the pages but thinking about Gundam or whatever. You gotta actually be reading the books.
This is the easiest question you have ever asked me in my entire life. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 is the worst video game I've ever played. I would play that over and over and over again rather than read all the Harry Potter books. You don't even have to put the fucking quiz thing, just just confirm that I've actually read it all the way through to cover. It's still Sonic the Hedgehog. It's a bad game, but it's got, a bunch of goofy bullshit in it that I like Sonic kisses that lady, and that's dumb, and that's funny. Shadow's in there, and I like Shadow the Hedgehog. I like Knuckles and Tails and Rouge. I like all those characters. Blaze the Cat, she's in there. You got Silver. He's not that exciting, but he's there too. He's like Trunks if it was, bad in the Sonic the Hedgehog game. All of that, 1,000 times better than basically anything past book 3 in Harry Potter, which is where I tapped out when I was a kid. If it was just the first couple, I can do it. Once you're past that, I'm like, I'm good.
You're saying you don't want to read all 900 pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix?
Oh, God, no. Oh, Jesus Christ. Again, I got about 50-something pages into Goblet of Fire. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And I was 12. And I was like, I can't do this. And I probably literally went and started playing fucking Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 at that point.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's my dumb challenge.
All right. Let's see. Here's a good one for you, Jonathan. What's the stupidest thing you've ever spent money on?
Oh, for me, that's tough. Yeah. Because I've spent some money on some stupid fucking things. I'm an idiot. Oh, man. Oh, boy. I don't even know. This is tough. Let's see. I'm thinking about stuff in my immediate vicinity. I might need time to think about this one. I have a lot of... okay, you know what? It was probably the Super NES Classic. I feel is a weirdly illustrative example because that thing was kind of dumb. I stood out in line in Target because it was it was tough to get and it was all the rage. And then I did get it. It was nice to have, but it definitely wasn't worth it. I barely ever used it again. And then I got rid of it because it wasn't even fun to have as a display item. I have some dumb stuff I've bought that they're fun to put up in my environment, Like I have the special edition for the re-release of Fire Emblem, the original NES game that they put out on Switch, and the special edition didn't even have a cartridge in it because it was a digital download-only game, but it has a cool art book, and it has this like glass version of the Famicom cartridge of the game that you can put on your desk, and so I actually that's one of my favorite video game special editions. So that's not that stupid. Yeah, I think that would be up there. I've bought some dumb stuff in my life though, so I'd have to think about it.
Yeah, the Super Nintendo Classic thing, that was something where it came up on one of the podcasts I listened to recently, and I was like, oh my god, right, that shit happened. Like, it was like a huge thing, and they were sold out, with the NES and the Super Nintendo one, and it was like, and then they just stopped. Like, it was like such a 1 to 2 year fad, and everybody made them. Fucking PlayStation made a PlayStation Classic, Sega has all their like Genesis ones, and then it's just like, and then all of a sudden all those just stopped. There's like a weird moment in video game history where they're just like, oh, let's just put all these things out immediately, and then just absolutely flood the market, make everybody stop caring about them, and then we'll never do it again.
Sean, I actually have a better answer.
Okay.
Vamp for a second. I'll be right back. I need to show you this thing.
All right, Jonathan, he's gotten up. He's off camera. He's going to find something that's very stupid that he spent money on, which I'm excited to learn what that thing is going to be about. I mean, as Jonathan said earlier, he spent a lot of money on very dumb things that he'll use like once or twice maybe, and then he just doesn't do anything with it. Oh, and he's back now. He sat down. What's the stupid thing you've bought, Jonathan?
This isn't even the extent of it, but this is the one I had out that I could get out of a box really quickly. There was a sale. There was a sale at one point recently on this site. I think it's Groove, Gruv. I think they're like they're not an Amazon site, but they're like kind of an offshoot that like sells through Amazon or whatever. You can use Amazon Pay, but they basically they match Amazon's prices on everything, and then they will do these big silly discounts. And I was making an order there once for some things, and to fill out the order, I got Pokemon All-Stars Collection 2, which is a 10-disc DVD set of the final 10 volumes in the Pokemon All-Stars series, where it's sorted by Pokemon. So, like, there's a Chikorita disc, and it has 3 Chikorita episodes. And there's a Torchic disc, and there's 3 Torchic episodes. And there's a Meowth one on here. And this was like $8. And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. The real stupid one was, once I had, this is Volume 2, I then did want to find Volume 1.
Jonathan.
So I did go on eBay and find Volume 1 for also about $10. So I do have 20 discs of the Pokemon All-Stars collections, so I can break out if I ever, feel like I need to see a Lapras episode. I have Lapras here. This is better than you possibly imagined when you asked this question, isn't it?
Like, the Volume 2, like, it's a dumb thing to have bought, but when you said, like, oh, I did it to, like, fill out my cart or whatever for shipping, whatever, it's like, okay, everyone's done that once or twice in their life, where they've just bought something they didn't really need, but sure, like, I'm gonna, like, import this thing or whatever it is. I need something more in my cart. The fact that you then were like, well, I gotta have Volume 1, are there only 2 volumes? Is that why you stopped there?
Yeah. It's 20 volumes overall, that 10 are in Volume 1, 10 are in Volume 2. Because there was 20 separate releases, because they picked like the 20 most popular Pokemon at the time. These are from like the late 2000s. This is from 2009. I'm amazed they still had stock of these, but they did in 2024.
Have you watched any of them?
A little bit of one of them, 1 or 2 of them. The Meowth disc is good. It has one of my favorite episodes, the one where it's Go West, Young Meowth, where he talks like Meowth for a while, and then he teaches himself to talk English so that he can get with a girl Meowth, but then she doesn't like him. That's a sad episode.
Vaguely familiar. I feel like I saw that one.
And like if you open it up, it's a nice collection. It's got like the Pokedex details on each of the Pokemon.
Does it have the Japanese version on there too?
Of course not. They've never released those. This is dub only.
Well, Jesus Christ, Jonathan.
I was on a little bit of a Pokemon physical media kick this summer, because there were a couple things I was checking for my dissertation.
Wait, you bought that this summer?
That was this summer, yeah.
Oh, Jonathan. So that was like a couple months ago.
That was a couple months. I was probably in the spring. It was probably like April, May. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is a recent thing. Anyway, I also have sitting on my desk the Pokemon Black and White 4-movie collection.
Oh, of course.
This was actually for a dissertation thing. There's an interesting thing where one of the movies was released in 2 versions, black and white, kind of like the games, and there's like different Pokemon in different scenes. And I thought that would be interesting to look at for the video game chapter of my dissertation, because like that's actually an interesting idea.
Sure,
I think that is an interesting thing to do. Having sat down and watched one version and then parts of the other one. I couldn't make it through both versions of both because it's largely identical.
I was going to say, it's like, it sounds like an interesting thing to do if you had faith that they would, like, execute on that idea.
Yes.
But instead of just being like, well, in this frame, we replaced this Charmander with a Bulbasaur.
It's slightly more than that, but not enough more than that. And I couldn't just assume that until I watched it, right? This is academia. I got to do the research. I did do the research. I did write about it. I wrote several paragraphs to put in that chapter. I then pulled those paragraphs out because I was like, frankly, even having done all the work, it's not interesting enough. So this was ultimately for nothing, but I don't know. It'll go in the director's cut, the indulgent version of my dissertation where I put all the deleted writing back in.
God, Jonathan, you and your long, long history with the Pokemon anime, and it's I get, you watched it for a very long time, and you liked it a lot. It's just, I'm surprised that you bought that random collection of various episodes from across the run of Pokemon on DVD several months ago. You bought that, rather than, I don't know, like, if you just like buy the show, like a season or something, I don't know, just buy like a normal person. Like, why buy a variety pack of various episodes from all across the run?
Let's move on to a question for you, Sean.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, here's a one getting to know you question that I think is good. You get one video game, one movie, one anime, and one book to define your personality and taste. These don't necessarily have to be your favorite. They could be, if you want to do that. But if you wanted to introduce yourself to someone through these things, what would they be and why?
So give me, what are all the things I have to... It's a movie...
Video game, movie, anime, book.
Video game, movie, anime, book. I mean, anime is going to be Dragon Ball. That's easy.
Okay.
Like, it's very easy to pick that one. For book... Oh, man, maybe Romance of the Three Kingdoms or... Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or honestly, fucking Moby Dick, maybe. I don't know. Or it could just be like a collection of Shakespeare also.
I like that all your choices are things that the person to get to know you would have to watch hundreds of episodes or read thousands of pages.
Look,
it's good.
I'm a complicated person with a lot of depths. There's a lot of sides to me. Okay, I'm not, you can't just read a little pamphlet. You gotta get all the way through. And I'm technically like Moby Dick. It's like the whole thing. It's like you have to pet the cetology chapter where Melville goes on and on about biological facts about whales that are mostly incorrect. You got to get to that point too, because that's actually the most important part to getting to know me, because that's my favorite part. So then a game for my to get to know me and my personality. Oh, Genshin Impact. There you go.
Yeah.
You just throw that in there. That's just an easy one, honestly, these days. And then then a movie would be the movie. An easy one to say would be Godzilla, obviously, because it's my favorite movie, and I like giant monster stuff a lot. I also think Citizen Kane would be a big one. Because it's like, I like that movie, but I like that style of movie so much. So I'm going to say Citizen Kane just to give a little bit more variety, because I have my Japanese stuff kind of covered with Dragon Ball.
That's pretty good. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Now you get to ask a question and humiliate me again or whatever you were going to do.
Let's see. This one is sort of similar to what you just asked me. So, on our Weekly Stuff podcast, we did lots of like top 10 ever lists of TV shows and movies and all that kind of stuff. What are some of the most recent changes, Jonathan, to your top 10 ever lists?
Oh, that's a good question. So if we were like doing games or whatever, so we did like games, movies, books, TV shows, yeah. This is tough. So, I mentioned this on actually an episode of Japanimation Station that would have just aired this week when this is coming out, that I think if I were naming my top 2 anime, and frankly, these might also just be top 2 TV shows, it would be Mobile Suit Gundam and The Melancholy of Suzumiya Haruhi, and that one is new since we did the most recent season of Japanimation Station. Those would probably be my top 2 in that area. For video games, I'm not sure what I would call my favorite game ever now, but I know I probably would supplant Persona 3 on that list. It used to be Persona 3, I think since playing Reload, not because I necessarily came away thinking less of the game. I think it's brilliant, but I think there are ones that like speak to me more now, or like I think the mechanical interactions between story and world and everything have gotten a little richer, or my tastes have changed. And I think my probably favorite games ever, if I had to pick, would be some combination of like Metroid Prime, Persona 5 Royal, I think would supplant that, and then a FromSoft game, and that could be Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Elden Ring. I'd have to think about that, and I'd have to replay some of those to really determine that. But that would probably be like near my kind of canon for that in terms of favorite games. Favorite TV shows, honestly, probably has not changed much. I think when we did it last time, we both had Doctor Who and Twin Peaks as 1 and 2. I think that would still probably be the case. I think those are the best two in terms of like live action TV shows. You know, other ones that would still be on my top 10 but might be even higher now would be like Hannibal, which I've been rewatching recently, and it's just fucking brilliant. Better Call Saul has finished since we last did that. Better Call Saul would be very, very high. That is one of the best American TV shows ever made, no question. And I've watched Deadwood and Justified since then.
Yes.
Those would be on there. So definitely all of those would go in there. In terms of book, I don't know if I would have any big differences for that anymore either, because I don't get to read a lot of fiction in my line of work for fun. If I made the time, I would have more time to do that, but it's just where I get lost a little bit. And then in terms of movies, I think I'm still comfortable calling Spirited Away my favorite movie. I know the last time I did a top 10, or I think I last did it was a top 12 list, was 2020. It was during the pandemic. And I know today the one big one I would add within my own personal top 10 for movies is Wong Kar-wai's. It would be a double feature of Wong Kar-wai's Chungking Express and Fallen Angels, and those are kosher to put on the list together because they are essentially two halves of a larger film project. And I think those two together, they're my favorite movie of the 1990s, easily, and they would be in my personal top 10 ever. So, there we go.
Nice. I'd like the Haruhi shout-out for TV shows, because, I think that would be in the conversation for me now, especially after rewatching it in, like, Endless 8 and all of that. But, very cool.
Char's Counterattack might be sneaking into the top 10 movies too.
Yeah.
I've got a piece that I'm working on that is going to be on the site in either October or November for Char's Counterattack, and it's both about the movie and about how the movie never fully leaves my brain, and I think that's part of why it would be there.
Yeah, if I did the top 10 movies again, there'd be multiple more animated movies on there for me, because I think Char's Counterattack would be on there, and one of the KyoAni movies. I mean,
yes.
Yeah, that's like a whole competition that we have a whole podcast.
Yes.
We've already recorded talking about that stuff. But yes, definitely Char's Counterattack is, that's a movie that just gets better every single time you watch it.
Yeah. Speaking of Gundam, Sean, I was looking back at the questions I asked you the last time we did an interview segment like this on Weekly Stuff Podcast number 400.
Yes.
And I asked you a fuck, marry, kill with Amuro, Char, and Bright from Mobile Suit Gundam.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to do it again. But this time it's fuck, marry, kill Char Clone Edition. So Sean, fuck, marry, kill Harry Ord from Turn A Gundam, Mr. Bushido / Graham Aker from Gundam 00, or Captain Mask from G-Reco.
I feel like this is probably pretty easy. I would marry Harry, not just because that rhymes, but marry Harry Ord. I mean, you see the way he treats Kielheim, who obviously thinks is Diana for some portion of that, but, he is just such a noble, righteous person who is just really there for you through thick and thin. I mean, you want that guy by your side for your life. That's a lifelong partnership with Harry Ord. I'm fucking Mr. Bushido up and down the street, man. Like, we're going at it like rabbits. Like, it's like, look at that guy. Goddamn. Keep the mask on, though. And then Kill was the G-Reco guy. Mask. Like, I don't have anything against him, but, he's kind of a dick. So it's just, compared to the loyal knight that is Harry Ord and, the fucking He-Man that is Mr. Bushido, Captain Mask just doesn't stack up compared to them.
Do you think when Harry Ord gets married, they you may now kiss your partner, and he does that, and then he pulls away and yells, "Universe!"
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
All right, very good. I like that question. Let's see. What are some other ones that I have? Here's a silly one, Jonathan. Have you finished the totally normal and not weird at all custom Monopoly game you've been making, which incorporates tabletop elements?
This is a long-time listeners of our podcast would know. During the pandemic, my weird project, and it was weirder than most people's weird project, was I started writing an RPG version of Monopoly called Chaos Monopoly, and I have been really close for about a year to completing the 2.0 update, which is where I've added all the full RPG mechanics, like it's got classes, it's got stats, it's got a lot of stuff. Thomas and I play tested it pretty heavily over Christmas, and I just have not had time to take all those notes and finally work them all in, because it is about 60 pages long now, the document. But it's close. It's really close. I just have to sit down and work on it and find the time. But it is almost ready for version 2.0, and then we can get that out in the world, and I can start working on version 3.0, which I am calling Chaos Monopoly Magic and Wizards. And I don't know what that will entail. I just know it'll have magic and wizards in it.
There you go. I mean, I don't know if you're going to need to make a 3.0, because once you get 2.0 out, you're just going to be rich, man. You're not going to have to make anything ever again. I mean, it's just the wealth will start pouring in once people see the beauty that is Chaos Monopoly.
It's my passion project.
Yeah.
It's my this. For those who don't know, Sean's 30th birthday podcast, which we mentioned earlier, was us learning about VTubers. Mine was us playing Chaos Monopoly, and Sean possibly thinking I need to be institutionalized.
Yes. Well, that was before you were diagnosed with ADD officially, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes sense now.
Yep. Yep. It makes sense now.
Anyway, all right. Let's see. We should probably wrap this up.
Yeah, I only got
soon.
a couple more.
So, okay. Let's see. What's the most used app on your phone?
Oh, geez. I mean, my web browser, which is just, that's like a very boring answer, but that's the truth. Other than the web browser, YouTube, Fate Grand Order. I still play Fate Grand Order a couple times a week. Probably Google Maps. Well, that depends on the time of the year with Google Maps. Obviously, I'm just going to work all the time, but over the summer, Google Maps. When I'm going more places. Spotify, which I use for my music stuff. That's probably like the big ones that I mostly use. Yeah, I mean, it's not anything super crazy or exciting. The tasks icon that helps me keep track of, like, hey, when is the garbage day, to remind me to put out garbage. That might actually be the most common one, because I have a couple of reminders set up. Usually every day there's something I need to be reminded about, or alarms. Yeah. You know, I live a very charmed, romantic, and exotic life. So I use things like my task app, my web browser, YouTube, and my alarm.
Yeah. This was a very exciting question, and I'm glad I asked it.
All right, Jonathan. What's a habit that you want to break but just can't seem to?
Oh, God, I don't know. Buying Pokemon DVDs on eBay that I don't need. No. Let's see. So I mostly do not drink, despite your question earlier about flavored soft drinks, I mostly do not drink flavored, like sugary soft drinks. I will once in a while, like, if the soda I drink is almost all Diet Coke, and I like Diet Coke, and I know people will be like, it's bad for you for exercise. I'm sorry, it's my vice, and it's not as bad as, like, smoking or something, so I'm okay with it. I do once in a while partake in a Mountain Dew or a Sprite, and I would like to cut that out of my life entirely. It's not like an everyday thing, but it's enough that when I want to pull myself out of that completely. That would be a nice habit to break.
Yeah, I'm glad that there wasn't like a surprise heroin addiction that I didn't know about. You know, that this is the first time we aired it on live on the first episode.
Well, I am addicted to black tar heroin, but I don't want to break that. That's the best time of my day every single day.
Fair point. I forgot that is part of my question. Yeah, the heroin and cocaine addictions. You know, those are like that's what keeps you going.
You gotta get through the day somehow, Sean.
I know that, brother.
All right. To be clear, Sean has never done drugs at or around school. In his profession, he would never do that.
Ever, really. You know,
I'm
a drug-free boy. I don't need that shit.
He's a real straight arrow. All right. I mean, heck, I think it's funny because I, as Sean said, have recently been diagnosed with ADHD. I am taking Adderall for the first time in my life, and it's my last semester of college. That's weird. Usually, you know, I've been in college for a long time because I'm getting my PhD, and I'd never done Adderall until now. And with a prescription, I'm lame. That sucks. I should have been doing this earlier.
There you go.
All right. Let's see. What is the opinion I've voiced on this podcast, in any version of this podcast, that you most vehemently disagree with?
I mean, recently it's the Sound Euphonium 3 on Japanimation Station. I just can't go with you there. I don't know what
I can't either. I agree.
You're just, I mean, that was probably one of your heroin days. I don't know. Like, it's just, I can't fathom why, like, your opinions and where they come from on that show. It just made no sense. I was so taken aback on that podcast. I was shocked. Like, I couldn't, like, I feel like if I listened to that podcast, I don't even remember what I said because I was so surprised. I was like, it's like one thing I knew I liked Sound Euphonium in general more than you, but I was just shocked at, like, how much you just did not like season 3 at all. And so that would be my big one. I'm sure there's some older ones. I'm sure there's like some podcasts that if I listened back to, I'm sure this is true for you as well. And like older ones that'd be like, what the fuck is Jonathan talking about here? But in terms of recent memory, it's that Sound Euphonium 3. I just don't know what's wrong with you.
All right. Well, that's okay. Mine would be that. Yeah, I think we were like mutually on that. Last of Us Part 2. You made good arguments, but you did not convince me. I'm sorry. It's okay. I'm happy for you, but not for me. Yeah.
Yeah, Last of Us Part 2, that's a good one as well. Yeah, where I think, usually we're on a pretty similar wavelength, even if we don't agree on everything with whatever it is. Those are two good examples of ones where we're just like on a very different sort of planes with where we're approaching and like kind of enjoying those shows or games. Let's see. This is about the last one I got here. So let's pick this one because this is fun. It's relevant to our podcast. Jonathan, what's the worst idea for the name of this podcast that you came up with but didn't want to share?
I have a list, some of them here. Let's see. I came up with a bunch of joke ones. I had Jonathan V. Sean, Dawn of Podcasts. I had Two Weekly Two Stuff. Here we go again. The Weekly Stuff Podcast, The Squeakquel, the Dodeca Annual Stuff Podcast, which would have been completely accurate because that means 12 times a year, but would have been a terrible name. Those are all just stupid jokes, though. God, what would be like a really awful one that like I didn't want to share with you? I feel like I shared all my ideas with you, and those were pretty much them. I also had an idea for calling it The Tears of Time, inspired by Mobile Suit Gundam. And then Thomas pointed out that if we ever do a tier-making segment, we should just call that The Tears of Time. And I think that's actually a better idea. I will say, just so everyone knows, I wanted to call this podcast, Hey, Listen, and I wanted to play the Navi voice sound at the beginning of every episode. And I don't think you disliked that idea. You didn't quite think it was right. But I've always wanted to call... I've several times suggested that for different incarnations of the podcast, because I've always wanted to do that. And one day, maybe I will.
One day, maybe you will.
All right, my last question that I will give you. What's a Doctor Who villain that has never been brought back for modern Doctor Who that you think is due for a reappraisal?
Oh, man. That's a really good question. Because there's a lot. There's a lot of them. The funny answer would be Meglos, the cactus monster that Tom Baker turns into in his last season, which is a terrible episode of Doctor Who, but it's a very memorable villain. But that's not my real answer. My real answer would be, what's it called? The Time Meddler from the first Doctor era, where you have it's the episode where the story where he goes back to, it's like medieval England, and there's a monk who's lived in like a church or whatever, and this is pre-Gallifrey, pre-Time Lords being a thing on Doctor Who, and there's another time traveler who they apply as the same species as the Doctor before that species was ever sort of clarified in the show. And he's called the Time Meddler, and it's a great William Hartnell story, and it's a great character. That's like a much more sort of puckish idea of the Master. He's less sort of like mustache twirling villain and more just this like impish little figure who likes to play tricks, like he's a Loki or trickster kind of figure. And I always thought that character and that story was extremely fun, and it would be nice to have a different kind of villainous Time Lord in the series that's not just the Master over and over and over and over again, that they have run that character into the ground at this point, because, I think Moffat topped it with Missy, and they've just went back to it again, and it just did not work. So, yeah, bring back the Time Meddler. That would be, I think, a very fun one. Or Meglos. I'd take Meglos also.
The Time Meddler is such a good name for a villain, though. I think that's good. All right. Well, I think that wraps up our topic segment for this month. Sean, thank you for playing along. This was fun. I think we know each other a little bit better now, and I think the audience does too. And if we ever murder someone, there is now incriminating dialogue on the podcast for the police to use.
And now I know I got to get those Pokemon Volume 1 and 2 collections. I got to get that into my life. It just sounds like a really worthwhile purchase. So I feel like I'm missing out that I didn't buy it.
All right, Sean, I think we have had a good show today. I think we are about to close up today. There's some other segments that we'll be introducing in the months to come that will be fun. Shameless plug before we go is I'll just say my site, fadetolack, jonathanlack.com, has a lot of exciting stuff coming. It is September now, and if you want to know what the movies of the week for September are, this week we just had a piece out on Beetlejuice, because Beetlejuice, the sequel, is coming out. And then the rest of the month I'm doing different Francis Ford Coppola movies, because his Megalopolis is coming out at the end of this month. So I've got pieces on all 3 Godfather movies and Bram Stoker's Dracula, which includes an image that I put together of, it's a collage of 4 different images from Dracula that looks so pornographic I'm kind of worried about putting it on the internet, but it is an accurate reflection of that very horny vampire movie. So, go sign up at jonathanlack.com. It's only $5 a month. It's only $3.75 a month if you're a college student. So give it a try.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, pick up a copy of 200 Reviews and let us know if you like it. And if you really like it a lot, leave a comment to support the idea that Jonathan should make a 300 Reviews book with 300 different critics reviewing the classic film 300.
Next time, for our October episode, we'll be following up on podcasts we did the last 2 Halloweens back on the weekly stuff. We just talked about one of them on our monthly 10 segment. 2 years ago, we looked at John Carpenter's original horror masterpiece, Halloween, and last year we reviewed the Rob Zombie remake and its sequel, Halloween 2. We talked then about jumping forward next year and doing the recent David Gordon Green trilogy, consisting of Halloween, but not that Halloween or that Halloween. This is 2018 Halloween, and then Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. And we thought we shouldn't let something as small as we killed off the old podcast and started a new one stop the fun. So you can consider this either part 3 of that series or the inaugural Halloween episode of Purely Academic, but that'll be your homework for next time, is some recent horror reboot legacy sequel movies. Sean, what kinds of things do you think we're going to learn next month?
Well, I don't know what we will learn, Jonathan, but I know what I want to learn. I've watched a lot of these Halloween movies, and nobody has explained to me why the fuck is a Halloween store selling an unfinished Captain Kirk mask in the first place?